My name is Alara Vance. I am 34 years old. My life is a conversation with the past, spoken in the hushed language of brittle paper and faded ink. I am a conservator, the head of archival sciences at the Ethelgard Institute, one of the most respected historical institutions in the country. My hands, stained with the faint, pleasant scent of leather balm and archival paste, are trained to mend the wounds of time. I can coax a crumbling 15th century manuscript back from the brink of oblivion, analyze the chemical composition of pigment on a medieval map, and piece together the fragmented story of a life from a box of forgotten letters. I live in a world of quiet precision, of patience, of profound respect for the fragile and the forgotten. For years, I believed this quiet life was enough. I told myself that the validation I found in my work, in the silent gratitude of history itself, was all I needed. I allowed my own story to be miswritten, my own contributions to be catalogued under a false heading by the people who were supposed to know me best, my family. I let them believe I was a glorified librarian, a keeper of dusty rooms, because keeping the peace felt safer than demanding to be seen. This is the story of how I finally learned to conserve the most important artifact of all, myself. My family, the Vances, operate on a different frequency. Their world is loud, glossy, and immediate. My father, Richard, is a retired investment banker who measures worth in market shares and profit margins. My mother, Catherine, navigates the social landscape of our city, Ethelgard, with the strategic precision of a general, her worth measured in invitations, influence, and the reflected glory of her children. And then there is my sister, Lyra. 2 years my junior, Lyra is a supernova. She owns Lyra Vance Contemporary, the most fashionable art gallery in the city's glittering arts district. She deals in artists whose work sells for 6 figures before the paint is dry. She is beautiful, ambitious, and charismatic, a whirlwind of sharp angles and brilliant smiles. In the Vance family narrative, Lyra was the sun, and I was the quiet, shadowy planet in her orbit. It was a role I accepted for so long, I forgot I had a choice. Our Sunday dinners were the stage upon which this dynamic was performed weekly. Held at my parents' sprawling home in the old, moneyed suburb of Crestwood, these gatherings were exercises in polite performance. Lyra would arrive, breathless and radiant, with tales of bidding wars in Zurich or of discovering the art world's next sensation in a Brooklyn loft. "We just placed a piece with the Beaumont collection," she would announce, and my parents would light up, a shared glow of pride warming their faces. The opening was a madhouse. Everyone was there. "That's our girl," my father would boom, pouring her another glass of expensive Chardonnay. Then, inevitably, the conversation would turn to me. "And how are things down at the dusty old institute, Alara?" my father would ask, his tone affectionate but dismissive. "Keeping the books in order?" "It's going well," I'd say, my voice always a little too soft. "We just acquired the Blackwood Correspondence. It's a fascinating collection from the turn of the century." "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother would murmur, her attention already drifting. "More letters. You must have so much time to read." They didn't understand that I wasn't reading them for pleasure. I was analyzing the paper for watermarks, studying the iron gall ink for signs of degradation, and creating a specialized housing to halt the slow march of decay. They didn't know that the nice little collection was a historic find that scholars had been hunting for decades, and that I, Dr. Alara Vance, was the one entrusted with its survival. The lie, or rather, the carefully curated misunderstanding, had started years ago. When I finished my doctorate, I'd tried to explain my work. I used words like spectroscopy and paleography. I saw my mother's eyes glaze over. I heard my father chuckle and say, "Just tell us if you find any treasure maps, Ellie." I saw Lyra's impatient little smile, the one that said, "Why are you being so boring?" So I stopped trying. "I work at the Institute" became "I'm a librarian." "I'm the head of conservation" became "I organize the special collections." It was easier. It kept the waters of our family life smooth and undisturbed. I told myself it didn't matter. Their world was the present, mine was the past. We simply spoke different languages. But every dismissive comment, every patronizing smile, was a tiny crack in my own foundation. I was allowing my identity to crumble, just like one of the neglected manuscripts I so painstakingly restored. The catalyst for change arrived in the form of a man. His name was Julian Croft, and he was, by all accounts, perfect for my sister. He was a senior specialist at Sterling and Croft, one of the world's most prestigious auction houses. He was handsome, intelligent, and moved through the world with the same easy confidence as Lyra. He was, in short, a man my parents could understand and admire. When Lyra announced their engagement, the family was ecstatic. The union was more than a marriage, it was a merger of two glittering worlds. The planning for the engagement party began immediately. It was to be held at Lyra's gallery, a testament to their shared aesthetic and social standing. As the date approached, a quiet dread settled in my bones. I knew what the party would be, a grander, more public version of our Sunday dinners. I would be the quiet, awkward sister in the corner, the one with the strange, dusty job, a quaint and slightly embarrassing footnote in the glowing story of Lyra and Julian. A week before the party, an email landed in my inbox at the Institute. The sender was Julian Croft of Sterling and Croft. My heart gave a little jolt. The subject line read, Query Re, Blackwood Correspondence Provenance. He was writing to the head of Archival Sciences. He was writing to me. He had questions about the very collection my family dismissed as nice little letters. He needed to verify their authenticity before his auction house could handle the sale of another estate with potential ties to the Blackwood family. His tone was professional, deferential, and deeply knowledgeable. He referred to Dr. Vance's recent monograph on 18th century paper production, a paper I had published in a leading academic journal a year prior. He knew my work. He respected my work. But he had no idea that the scholar he was corresponding with was the sister of the woman he was about to marry. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to stir within me. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was a quiet, firm sense of clarity. The separate worlds I had so carefully maintained were about to collide. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the impact. I was ready for it. In the days leading up to the engagement party, I immersed myself in my work. The Institute became my sanctuary, a fortress of quiet truth against the impending storm of family performance. My office, tucked away in the oldest wing of the building, was a world away from Lyra's stark white gallery. Here, the walls were lined with oak shelves, the air smelled of old wood and beeswax, and the only light was the gentle, filtered glow from the tall, arched windows that overlooked the Institute's cloistered gardens. My current project was the centerpiece of my professional life, the restoration of the Ethelgard Psalter, a 14th-century illuminated manuscript that was the jewel of our collection. Its pages were a testament to a faith and artistry that felt impossibly distant, each stroke of gold leaf and crushed lapis lazuli a prayer whispered across 7 centuries. The Psalter had suffered water damage in a flood decades before I was born, and its vellum pages were cockled and fragile, the vibrant pigments threatening to flake away into dust. My mentor, Dr. Alastair Finch, the Institute's director and a man who had known me since I was a nervous graduate student, would often stop by to observe my progress. Alastair was in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent among books. He was one of the few people who understood the silent poetry of my work. "How fares the patient, Alara?" he asked, peering through his spectacles at the delicate page I was working on. "The tide is turning," I said, not looking up from the microscopic brush I was using to apply a specialized consolidant. "I think we can stabilize the green pigments without any significant loss." The verdigris was the main concern. "I never doubted it," he murmured. "Your hands have a unique intelligence. You don't just repair these objects, you listen to them." He paused, leaning against a towering bookshelf. I saw the query from Sterling and Croft about the Blackwood papers. A sharp young man, that Julian Croft. He's making quite a name for himself. "He is," I said, my hand steady despite the sudden flutter in my chest. Alastair looked at me, his gaze gentle but perceptive. He knew my family situation. He had attended a disastrous gallery opening with me once, years ago, and had witnessed firsthand the casual way my accomplishments were brushed aside. "Lyra's fiancé, isn't he?" Alastair asked softly. I nodded, finally meeting his eyes. "He doesn't know. He thinks Dr. Vance is a stuffy old man with a beard, I imagine." Alastair gave a dry chuckle. "Well, the truth has a funny way of making itself known, often at the most opportune moments. Just remember, my dear, the value of an object or a person isn't determined by the loudest voice in the room. It's determined by its intrinsic quality, its authenticity. And you, Alara Vance, are a first-edition folio in a world of paperbacks." His words were a balm. They reinforced the sense of self I was slowly, painstakingly trying to restore. The work on the Psalter became a metaphor for my own internal process. Just as I was mending the fragile manuscript, I was mending myself. I was learning to handle my own worth with the same care and reverence I gave to the priceless artifacts in my charge. For too long, I had allowed myself to be treated like a common reprint, left on a dusty shelf to be forgotten. The day of the party, I chose my attire with the care of a historian selecting an artifact for display. I didn't want to compete with Lyra's glittering world. I wanted to represent my own. I wore a simple, beautifully tailored dress in a deep teal blue, the color of the ink in a medieval charter. My only jewelry was a pair of silver earrings modeled after the Celtic knots in the Book of Kells. I felt calm, centered, and ready. I was not going to the party as Lyra's little sister. I was going as myself. The gallery was breathtaking and alienating. It was a vast, white space, stripped of all warmth and history. The air hummed with the energy of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the thrum of minimalist electronic music. Massive, abstract canvases screamed with color from the walls, the art of the now, aggressive and demanding. My parents found me almost immediately. "Alara, darling, you made it." My mother kissed the air beside my cheek. "There's a bit of a crisis with the catering. Could you just pop back and make sure the servers are organized?" Lyra is beside herself. Before I could answer, my father clapped me on the shoulder. "Good girl, Ellie. Always helpful. Don't hide in the corner all night, eh? Try to mingle." The old Alara would have nodded meekly and slipped away to the kitchens. The new Alara stood her ground. "I'm sure the caterers are professionals, Mom," I said, my voice pleasant but firm. "I'm going to find the happy couple and offer my congratulations." They looked at me, slightly taken aback by this small act of resistance, but were quickly swept away by a wave of new arrivals. I navigated the crowded room, feeling like a time traveler. These were Lyra's people, artists with calculatedly messy hair, collectors with shrewd eyes, socialites who treated life as a competitive sport. I finally saw them holding court in the center of the room. Lyra was incandescent in a dress of molten gold, her laugh bright and loud. Julian stood beside her, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed, a fixed smile on his face. As I approached, I saw him scan the crowd, his eyes briefly passing over me with no sign of recognition. Lyra saw me and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Abby, there you are. Everyone, this is my sister Alara." She turned to the small circle of admirers around them. "She's the family intellectual. Works at the old Ethelgard Institute. You know, with all the dusty books and things. We're so proud she took a night off from the 18th century to join us." The group chuckled politely. The familiar sting was there, but it was distant now, like a half-forgotten pain. I simply smiled. "It's a beautiful party, Lyra," I said. "Congratulations to you both." I extended a hand to Julian. "Alara Vance. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He took my hand, his grip firm. "Julian Croft. The pleasure is all mine. Lyra talks about you all the time." His smile was genuine, but his eyes held a flicker of confusion, a sense of faint familiarity he couldn't quite place. "I'm sure she does," I replied, holding his gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. I saw the question forming in his mind, the mental gears turning. Before he could voice it, Lyra pulled him away to greet a wealthy collector who had just arrived. I spent the next hour in a state of quiet observation. I watched Lyra bask in the spotlight. I watched Julian's smile grow progressively more strained as the night wore on. I watched my parents glow with pride. And I felt a profound sense of detachment, not of bitterness, but of peace. I was no longer a part of this performance. I was simply an audience member, waiting for the final act. The moment came, as I knew it would, during the toasts. After my father's booming tribute and a witty, anecdote-filled speech from Julian's business partner, Lyra raised her glass, her eyes sweeping the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice ringing with emotion. "To be here tonight, surrounded by so much love and success, is a dream come true. To be standing next to Julian, a man who is actively shaping the future of the art world, is the greatest prize of all." She paused, her eyes finding me in the crowd. She gave me a sweet, pitying smile. "It takes all kinds to make a world," she continued, a soft, patronizing lilt in her voice. "Some of us are lucky enough to create the future. And some of us, like my dear sister Alara, are content to simply file away the past. To each their own, I suppose. To my brilliant future." A wave of polite applause followed. I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to me, some curious, some sympathetic, some amused. In that moment, I was supposed to shrink. I was supposed to blush and look at the floor. But I didn't. I simply held my champagne flute and met Lyra's triumphant gaze. It was Julian who broke the spell. He hadn't joined the applause. He was staring at me, his face pale, the pieces clicking into place with an almost audible snap. He turned to Lyra, then back to me. "Wait a moment," he said, his voice cutting through the fading applause. He walked the few steps from the center of the room to where I stood. The crowd quieted, sensing a shift in the evening's script. "Alara Vance. From the Ethelgard Institute." "That's right," I said calmly. What exactly is it that you do at the Institute?" he asked, his eyes searching my face, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. This was the moment. The culmination of a decade of quiet dismissals, of being lovingly, carelessly, and completely erased. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, then lowered the glass. I looked past Julian, to my sister, to my parents, to the silent, watching room. "I am Dr. Vance," I said, my voice not loud, but clear and resonant in the sudden stillness. "I'm the head of Archival Sciences and Conservation. You and I have been corresponding for the past week about the provenance of the Blackwood collection. Your query regarding the integrity of the Iron Gall ink on Folio 12 was particularly insightful." The silence that followed was unlike any I had ever experienced. It was not an absence of sound. It was a solid, physical presence, a tangible thing that pressed in on all sides. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into a million pieces. The word conservation hung in the air of that sterile white gallery like a strange, exotic bird. My father's jovial smile froze and then collapsed. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, a gesture of pure, unadulterated shock. Across the room, I saw Alistair Finch, who had slipped in unnoticed, lift his glass to me with a small, triumphant nod. But my focus was on the triangle of people at the heart of the blast radius: Lyra, Julian, and me. Lyra's face was a canvas of warring emotions. Disbelief, confusion, and then a slow, dawning wave of incandescent rage. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You check out books. You organize shelves." "She's not," Julian said, his voice low and strained. He never took his eyes off me. "Dr. Alara Vance. The expert on medieval illumination. The author of The Scribe's Hand, a study of Carolingian scriptoria. That's you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a truth he was wrestling with in real time. "You're a doctor," my father stammered, looking at me as if I'd just sprouted a second head. "Since when?" "For about 7 years, Dad," I replied, my voice still even. "I had a small party to celebrate." "Mom, you sent a lovely floral arrangement. The card said, 'Congratulations on finishing your program.'" My mother went white. The memory, long buried under the more convenient narrative of my little job, surfaced with brutal clarity. "But I thought it was a master's degree. In library science." "It was a PhD," I said gently. "In art history and material science." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. You could feel a decade of assumptions crumbling to dust. Then, as always, Lyra exploded. She cared less about the truth of my identity and more about the fact that it had been revealed at her party, on her night. "This is unbelievable," she shrieked, turning on me, her golden dress seeming to crackle with fury. "This is my engagement party. My one night. And you have to do this. You have to stand there and invent this ridiculous story just to embarrass me. Just to steal my moment." "I didn't invent anything, Lyra," I said, and for the first time, my voice carried a note of steel. "I just answered a question. I stopped letting you tell my story for me. This moment isn't about you or me. It's about the truth." "The truth," she laughed, a wild, sharp sound. "The truth is you've been lying to us for years. Letting us all think you were some mousy little librarian. Who does that?" "Someone who got tired of trying to be heard," I said quietly. "Someone who learned that her accomplishments made the people she loved uncomfortable, so she put them away. Like a precious book on a shelf, hoping one day someone might actually care enough to open it." Julian finally turned away from me and looked at his fiancé. His expression was one of profound disappointment. "She didn't have to lie, Lyra. You created the environment where she couldn't tell the truth. The way you spoke about her tonight, the way you've always spoken about her. I just never understood." He looked around the pristine gallery. "This whole time, I've been hearing about your brilliant sister, the scholar at the Institute, from colleagues. I had no idea it was the same person you described as your sweet, unambitious sibling." Lyra stared at him, her face twisting with betrayal. "You knew? You knew about this, and you didn't tell me." "Of course I didn't know it was her," he shot back, his voice rising. "How could I? The person you described and the person whose work I admire are two completely different people. The perfect couple, the glittering merger of art and commerce, was fracturing right before our eyes. Lyra looked around the room, at the stunned faces of her friends, her clients, her parents. She saw that the spotlight she craved was now illuminating something ugly and uncomfortable. The narrative she had so carefully controlled had been wrested from her hands. "You've ruined everything," she whispered, the words choked with a venomous self-pity. Then she turned and fled, her golden dress a streak of despair as she disappeared into a back office, slamming the door behind her. Julian stood frozen for a moment, his handsome face a mask of conflict. He gave me one last, long, unreadable look before turning to follow her, his duty as a fiancé warring with the disillusionment in his eyes. The party died around me. Guests began to murmur, finding excuses to leave. The minimalist music suddenly seemed jarringly loud. My parents drifted towards me, their faces etched with confusion and a nascent, unfamiliar guilt. "Elara," my mother began, her hand fluttering at her throat. "We had no idea." "I know," I said. And the sadness of that statement was a weight in my chest. It wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. I found Alistair by the door. He put a comforting hand on my arm. "Authenticity is a disruptive force," he said softly. "Well done, my dear." I walked out of the gallery and into the cool, quiet night. The air of Ethelgard, usually so full of energy, felt still and clean. I had not gone in there seeking a fight. I had not wanted to destroy my sister's happiness. I had simply wanted to claim my own space, to stand in my own truth. The aftershocks were not my responsibility. I had spent a lifetime absorbing the tremors of my family's dynamics. Tonight, for the first time, I had stood firm, and the ground had shaken around me. The day after the party was a landscape of digital noise and profound personal silence. My phone was a constant, buzzing source of anxiety, filled with texts and missed calls from a parade of relatives. There were messages of shock from my aunts, of mortified apology from my father, of bewildered questioning from my mother. There were none from Lyra. I sought refuge where I always did, in the quiet, ordered world of the Institute. I spent the morning in my lab, the familiar scent of my work a comforting anchor. The Ethelgard Psalter lay open on my workbench, its silent, centuries-old beauty a balm to my frayed nerves. It had survived floods and fires and the slow decay of time. It reminded me that survival was possible. Resilience was a form of art. Around noon, my assistant buzzed through on the intercom. "Dr. Vance, there's a Mr. Croft here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." My heart stuttered. I smoothed my lab coat, took a deep breath, and told her to send him in. Julian looked exhausted. The impeccable polish of the previous night had been worn away, revealing someone tired and deeply troubled. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of my office, a world of oak and vellum so different from the one he inhabited. "I hope this isn't an intrusion," he said. "It's fine, Julian. Please come in." He wandered around the room, his eyes taking in the neatly organized tools, the books stacked in orderly piles, the faint, clean smell of my work. He stopped in front of the framed diploma on my wall. "I was an art history minor in college," he said softly. "I almost went the academic route. I remember reading your monograph in graduate school. It was formidable." "Lyra prefers abstracts," I said, the old habit of deflecting, of making myself smaller, dying hard. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "I came here to apologize, Elara. Not for Lyra, but for myself. For my own blindness. I should have seen it. The way she needed to diminish you, it was a pattern. And I was complicit in it because it was easier than confronting her." "You loved her," I said. It was the simplest explanation. "I think I loved the idea of her," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "The brilliant, unstoppable force. But last night, I saw the machinery behind the brilliance. The insecurity. The cruelty." He paused, his gaze finding mine. "I can't marry that. I can't build a life with someone whose light depends on dimming someone else's." We talked for almost an hour. Not about Lyra, but about our work. About the tension between an object's market value and its historical worth. About the stories things tell when you listen closely enough. It was the kind of conversation I had only ever had with Alistair, a meeting of two minds who spoke the same language. By the time he left, I understood that his visit was not about our family drama. It was about respect. He had come to acknowledge the scholar he had admired from afar, and to separate her from the fiction his fiancé had created. 2 days later, Lyra appeared at my apartment. She looked like a ruin. Her face was bare of makeup, her eyes were red and swollen, and she was wearing a shapeless gray sweatshirt that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. She stood on my doorstep for a full minute before she spoke. "Can I come in?" Her voice was small, stripped of its usual ringing confidence. I stepped aside and let her pass. We sat on my sofa, the silence between us a vast, uncharted territory. The air was thick with years of things unsaid. "Why?" she finally whispered, looking at her hands. "Why didn't you just tell me, Ellie? Would you have listened?" I asked, my voice gentle. "When I tried years ago, did you listen? Or did you get bored and change the subject?" She flinched, but didn't deny it. "I was supposed to be the successful one," she said, the words raw and honest. "That was my job. Dad's brilliant dealmaker, Mom's social star. You were supposed to be the quiet one. The smart, steady one who didn't need the spotlight." "I never wanted your spotlight, Lyra," I said. "I just wanted to be allowed to stand in my own. You weren't just taking the spotlight, you were casting a shadow over me to make yours seem brighter." She nodded slowly, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Julian's gone. He's postponed the wedding indefinitely. He said he needs to rethink everything." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain so profound it resonated with my own. "I'm not here to blame you," she said, her voice cracking. I think I'm here because I don't know who I am without the performance. And you seem to know exactly who you are, even when you were hiding it." It was the most vulnerable, most truthful thing she had ever said to me. The rage was gone, replaced by a devastating clarity. "I was proud of you," she whispered. "I went to your thesis defense, you know." I sat in the very back. I didn't understand half the words, but I saw the way those old professors looked at you. With awe. It scared me. You had this whole world that I couldn't touch, that I couldn't compete in. So I pretended it didn't exist. The confession settled between us, a fragile, precious thing. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. It was the key to a lock I thought was rusted shut forever. That conversation was not a magic cure. The deep wounds of a lifetime are not mended in a single afternoon. But it was a beginning. It was the first, tentative stitch in a long and complex process of repair. In the months that followed, things shifted, slowly and seismically. Lyra and Julian did not get married. She began therapy. She closed her gallery for a month, a shocking move in her world, and went traveling. Not to the art capitals of Europe, but to quiet places with ancient histories. She sent me a postcard from a small town in the Italian countryside. "There's a church here from the 12th century," it read. "It made me think of you." My parents began a clumsy, heartfelt effort to understand my world. My father started reading history books. My mother asked me to give her a private tour of the institute, and she listened, really listened, as I explained the science and art of my work. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had finally learned to validate myself. But to receive it, freely and genuinely offered, was a strange and unexpected grace. My life is still quiet. I still spend my days in the hushed halls of the past, mending the wounds of time. But I no longer hide there. I walk through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who knows her own worth, independent of any external measure. The peace I feel now is not the fragile peace of avoidance, but the deep, resilient peace of authenticity. Sometimes, Lyra and I meet for coffee. Our conversations are stilted at times, careful. We are learning a new language together, rebuilding a sisterhood from the foundation up. It is slow, meticulous work, not unlike restoring a damaged manuscript. It requires patience, care, and a profound respect for the fragility of the object. But for the first time in our lives, we are both committed to the process. For the first time, we are creating something true and lasting together.